Okay. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians and guests.
Hi, Brad.
I
Yung
welcome you
moderator.
to
Hi, Brad.
joint meeting
This
of
one,
the
yeah, I can
Rotary
see
Club
now.
of
I can
Makati
see now.
and the Rotary Club Makati Premier District. I would now like to call the President of the Rotary Club of Makati, Perfect Vision President Peter Manzano, to call the meeting to order.
Thank you, PB Fred. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Makati, I now call this 31st regular meeting and joint meeting with the Rotary Club of Makati Premier District to order.
Thank you. I'd now like to call on Perfect Vision President Ricky Trinidad of the Rotary Club of Makati Premier District to also call this meeting to order.
Thank you, PP Fred. On behalf of the Rotary Club of Makati Premier District, I call this joint meeting with our mother club, Rotary Club of Makati, to order.
Thank you. Fellow Rotarians and guests, we now come to the highlight of our program. I would like to call on Rotarian Chari Lutuno to introduce our guest speaker for today.
Hello, everyone. I am honored to introduce our guest speaker for this afternoon. Dr. Robert Dennis J. Garcia is a BS Biology graduate of Ateneo de Manila and a graduate of the University of Santo Tomas School of Medicine. He mastered in Health Services Administration at the George Washington University School of Business and had his pediatric residency training at the Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. He completed an infectious disease fellowship at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston and currently chairs the Pediatric Infectious Disease section of the Makati Medical Center. Dr. Garcia, or simply Dennis, is a friend to many of us and surely has been the devoted pediatrician to some of your children. His sister, Congresswoman Milen Garcia Albano, was a batchmate in Assumption High School, and his cousin Sonia Garcia was Rina Lopez and my high school classmate as well. On a personal note, Dennis has been our family friend for many years. Let's all give a listen as he tells us what we all need to know to convince ourselves to get the COVID vaccine. Fellow Rotarians and guests, let's all warmly welcome Dr. Dennis Garcia.
Thank you, Charilu. May I share screen?
The other vacuum sounds good.
Okay, thank you, President Peter Manzano, President Ricky Trinidad, and our host, Mr. Fred Parungao, for having me. I thank again my friend Chari Lupon for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. So what I'd like to do right now is to give a talk on trying to convince all in the audience on why we should take this vaccine. I have given this talk to my colleagues at Makati Medical Center, Cardinal Santos, to my village where I live. I've also spoken about this to my classmates and to my families in Davao. So the title of this talk is what we need to know about the COVID vaccine safety and efficacy so that we may convince ourselves and others to get vaccinated. Okay. So there was a study that came out of China from the journal Vaccine, and they spoke about what factors influenced vaccination decision-making among the Chinese. There were 1,800 people who were surveyed, and these were the results of that study. Number one, of course, vaccine effectiveness. How good is the vaccine that we're going to get? And most people would have said side effects would be the second most important factor. But in this study, they found surprisingly that number two reason for getting the vaccine was the proportion of acquaintances vaccinated. How many of us in our family, how many of us in our Rotary Club of Makati are going to get the vaccine? Certainly it helps if 100% of you will get it, as opposed to if only 60% or 50% of you got it. Less so, the other factors considered was vaccination has to be free, and that's why our country is providing this for free, hopefully. Of course, fewer doses would be good. No? One would be better than two, obviously. Longer protection, but we don't know how long the vaccine protection will be at this time. And access to vaccination sites. That study found that people would much prefer to get a vaccine in a hospital rather than in a barangay health clinic or a health center. Otherwise, in that study, they found that there was a higher probability to be vaccinated for older folks, people who had a lower education level, people with lower incomes, people who had a higher trust in the vaccine, and those who had a higher perceived risk of infection. Certainly diabetics and people who have hypertension would be more likely to ask for the vaccine. In another study, though, from Israel, they found that a higher education level increased the probability to get the vaccine. So this is the outline of my talk. I will talk about vaccines in general, then I will talk about the important vaccines that we have, and then at the end, I will talk about the efficacy of these vaccines. So vaccine production in the time of COVID. In the past, vaccines would take up to 15 years to be tested, approved, and sold. Number two, previous vaccine with the shortest production time was the mumps vaccine that your children and grandchildren received, and that took all of 5 years for development. I was a resident doctor in Washington in the 80s, and HIV/AIDS reared its head at that time. And for the past 35 years, people have been striving to get a vaccine for HIV, but believe it or not, at this time, wala pa rin vaccine for HIV. Number four, the COVID viral genomic sequence was determined only in January of 2020, but by December, hardly 10 months later, the COVID vaccines were already out and being given in Israel and the United States in the millions. And number five, the extent of illness all over the world and the significant morbidity and mortality necessitated the fast tracking of vaccine development and production. And we are seeing the fruit of that, all that production. So now I'm going to talk to you about the different types of vaccines or vaccine platforms that are being used for the vaccines that we read about in the papers. The first vaccine is the inactivated or killed virus vaccines. An example of this is Sinovac, which is the first vaccine that became available here. With this platform, the virus is chemically killed so that these are incapable of causing disease. So these are safe and effective vaccines, and these have been used for long years for the influenza vaccines. Again, Sinovac and another product that's coming up soon, Bharat Biotech from India, use this platform. The second platform are the so-called protein subunit vaccines. An example of this is Novavax. You've heard that Novavax might also be coming to our shores soon. This is an American product. So protein subunit vaccines use a specific synthetically produced, not live, piece of the COVID-19 virus to elicit the immune response. This is popular due to their proven safety. Over 70 such COVID candidate vaccines use this platform. And for decades, this has been used for hepatitis B, human papillomavirus, and meningococcal vaccines. So these have a well-known safety profile. The third vaccine that you've heard about is the vaccines that are being given in the United States at this time. These are so-called RNA vaccines. This is a novel or new vaccine platform. No such vaccines have been approved for other illnesses in the past. These vaccines, the RNA vaccines, deliver instructions encoded in nucleic acid sequences that direct the body cells, your cells, to manufacture the vaccine protein in vivo within your body. And when this happens, your immune system reacts to those proteins and produces antibodies. For C, such vaccines mimic natural infection or similar. They're like the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. So these are attractive as they're easier and faster to manufacture in large quantities. And no wonder the two products that were out in the market were the RNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna. So Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA vaccines, and they use a lipid-based nanoparticle carrier system to allow the vaccine to enter the human cell. The fourth vaccine platform that we've heard about is the one being used by Astra that we have here. So this is a so-called non-replicating viral vector vaccines. It uses the virus, adenovirus. Adenovirus is a common cold virus, usually a mild common cold virus. And genetic material from COVID is piggybacked onto this virus so that it can enter our cell and produce immunity. So this is also a new vaccine platform. Again, it uses a weakened non-COVID virus, specifically the adenovirus, plus genetic material of the COVID virus, which we call the spike protein, to stimulate the immune system. This modified carrier virus cannot initiate a productive infection, meaning it doesn't last long in your body after it's injected. They enter the cell, express the spike protein from COVID, and then they stop their life cycle. This elicits a robust immune response, and a single dose may suffice. And this is the vaccine that J&J uses. These are safe and have been used in immunocompromised folks. The advantage is that we do not have to freeze the Astra vaccine, unlike the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. However, pre-existing antibodies to the adenovirus may limit their effectiveness. Still with adenovirus vaccines, the downside is they generally need large doses to manufacture, which makes large demands on their manufacture on a global scale. So we have three products who use the adenovirus vector vaccine platform. Astra, which we're familiar with. Janssen, or the J&J, Johnson & Johnson, uses a single dose human adenovirus 26 vector. And we've heard in the news, the Philippine FDA approved the entry of Gamaleya, or the Sputnik vaccine from Russia. This also uses adenovirus vector vaccine. So to give you an idea how these vaccines are sampled and tested, they go through three phases, the preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So preclinical is when the vaccine is studied in animals like rats and macaques. And then phase 1 is when small studies are done for less than 100 people. Phase 2 is when a few hundred people are studied, looking at vaccine safety, immunogenicity, and efficacy. Phase 3 is when much of the difficulty comes, when the vaccines are tested over large populations in Asia, the United States, Europe, numbering in the tens of thousands. So they test different populations so that they find out that these vaccines will work as well for Asians as they will for Africans and Americans and Europeans. If the phase 3 trial is successful, then they can apply for licensing. And that's what we have seen. Phase 4 is when the product is already out in the market, and post-marketing surveillance still seeks to find out if the vaccine is as good as was found in the trials. Okay, so now we talk about specific vaccines, and here I'm going to talk about side effects. Now, to try to calm you, if any of you have not received your vaccines yet, these are what you will expect when you get your shots. And these are the local reactions and the systemic reactions. So for Pfizer, the top product in the United States now, but not here yet, pain is the most common side effect. With the first dose, 83 or 8 out of 10 people will complain of arm pain. And the second dose, it's about the same, 78% will have arm pain. All other local side effects are less than 5%. So it's really just pain that people complain about or notice. For the systemic reactions for Pfizer, these are what you would expect. 1, 2, and 3, fatigue, headache, and muscle pain. So fatigue, about half will have fatigue after the first shot, and about 12% more with the second shot. So you'll feel weak and tired for a day or two after the shot. Headache, about close to half will have it with the first and second dose, and then much less muscle pain, although the muscle pain doubled with the second shot. The other symptoms or side effects were much less other than these three. Okay, so those are the mild side effects, and we pretty much expect those with even the flu shot. How about the unsolicited adverse reactions, the more serious ones? So there were 4 people who got Bell's palsy. Bell's palsy is a weakening or a mild paralysis of one half of your face. So this happened in 4 vaccinees, none for placebo. But the assessment was this was similar to the rate of Bell's palsy in the general population, and there was no basis for a cause and effect relationship. What about serious adverse reactions? So there were 7 cases of appendicitis for the Pfizer vaccine versus 2 for placebo. 3 people had a heart attack versus 0 for placebo, and 3 had a stroke versus 1 for placebo. And these are very small numbers. And there were 2 deaths from the Pfizer recipients, 1 from atherosclerosis, 1 from a heart attack, but there were even more deaths for the placebo recipients, 4, 1 with a stroke and 1 with a heart attack. And the above deaths were not considered due to the vaccine. Next, we go to the second vaccine, Moderna. This is the second vaccine that's been available in the United States. We are told that Moderna might be coming here. This is the brand that the group of Mr. Ricky Razon is bringing in. So these are the local reactions for Moderna, for those of you who will get this. Again, pain, similar to Pfizer. About 8 to 9 out of 10 will have pain in the shot site. So just expect that. And then the others are much less frequently seen. The median onset of pain will be a day, within a day of the vaccine, and this will last for 2 to 3 days. Systemic reactions from the shot, again, fatigue, headache, and muscle pain, similar to what we heard with Pfizer. So fatigue, about 39% with the first shot, goes up to 68% with the second shot. Headache, 35 and 63% with the second shot. Muscle pain, 24%, but up to 61% with the second shot. And these things will last for a couple of days, and then you're fine by the 3rd day. Okay, still with Moderna vaccine safety, these were the serious adverse reactions seen during the vaccine trials. 5 had a heart attack compared to 3 for placebo. Gallbladder inflammation, 3 vaccinees versus 0 for placebo. Kidney stones, 3 vaccinees versus 0 for placebo. And there were a couple of vaccinees who had some facial swelling for those of these for these folks who got cosmetic fillers in their face. So next we go to the Astra vaccine. This is the vaccine available here, and this is the vaccine I personally received. I'm sure that a few people in the audience have also received this. And Astra vaccine was studied over 4 study sites before this was distributed. And this vaccine was also well tolerated. And these were the local reactions for Astra. Pain was seen in up to 88%, although the second dose was accompanied by less pain. And systemic symptoms, including fatigue, headache, and muscle pain, were seen in from 65 to 86%, and went down a bit to 43 to 72% with the second shot. Fever, 24% with the first dose, but 0 in the second dose. Here we talk about Sinovac vaccine. This is the second vaccine available locally. These are the local, so they're essentially with the Sinovac vaccine, the side effects are much less compared to the Western vaccines. Pain, only in 12%. Swelling, only 4%. And these are the systemic reactions with Sinovac. Fatigue, only 1% compared to the 60% for the Western products. Fever, 4% only. Nausea, only 2%. So generally better tolerated than the Western vaccines. Next, we'll talk about Sputnik. That's also coming hopefully soon. I read in the paper today that Sputnik will be coming in the next 2 months. Most common adverse reactions were a flu-like illness, but only in 15%. Injection site pain, only in 5%. And most of the side effects were of grade 1 or very mild, 94%. So for Sputnik, no serious adverse events were associated with the shot. And furthermore, for Sputnik, there were 4 deaths among the recipients, 3 for vaccinees and 1 for placebo. There were 2 Russians or 2 recipients who developed COVID after the shot, but when they did the analysis, it was determined that these folks probably already had COVID infection at the time they got the injection. And okay, so this is summary table of what I already told you for the past 10 minutes. So comparing vaccine safety and systemic and local reactions for Pfizer, Moderna, Astra, Sinovac, and J&J. So again, you see pain in a big majority of Pfizer and Moderna and Astra. Sinovac, much less. Then the systemic reactions will be expect to see fatigue and headache and muscle and joint pain. Okay, so this is what we should expect so that we won't get distressed when we feel these symptoms when we get the shot. Next, I compared the serious adverse events associated with the vaccines during the trials. And these were the big numbers that were involved. For Pfizer, 43,000 people got this in the trial. For Moderna, 30,000. Astra, 20,000. So small numbers of serious adverse events. 7 appendicitis for Pfizer, 3 heart attacks, 3 strokes, 1 shoulder injury, 4 Bell's palsy or weakness of one side of the face. For Moderna, also similar small numbers. Astra, small numbers. And look at the bottom line. There were no deaths attributable to the vaccine for Pfizer, Moderna, and Astra. So this is the bottom line for vaccine side effects. There will be shot site pain in about 80%, fatigue and headache in about 60%, fever in 9 to 20%, small minority. Older people will have less side effects compared to younger people. There will be a bit more side effects during the second shot, and the side effects lasted only 1 or 2 days and were of mild to moderate in intensity. Importantly, vaccines did not cause any deaths. There were no serious adverse effects in more than 130,000 people in the vaccine trials. So this is our bottom line. The approved vaccines are very safe. Okay, so in January, there was a report from the US CDC that published the rate of anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis would be a severe allergic reaction as a result of any injection that you might get. This might happen with penicillin or any other shot that you might get, especially antibiotics. No? But as of January 18, there were a total of more than 16 and a half or 17 and a half million Americans who had received Pfizer and Moderna. And look at this bottom line, anaphylaxis reporting rate. So there were 4.7 cases per million of Pfizer vaccines who had anaphylaxis, and 2.5 cases per 1 million shots for Moderna. So very, very, very small numbers for a severe allergic reaction. 4 per million and 2 per million. Very small numbers. In any case, when you get your shot soon, if you haven't gotten this yet, this is what we advise, and this is what will happen in the vaccine centers. You will have supplies for anaphylaxis, specifically epinephrine or adrenaline. This is an intramuscular injection. You will have a post-vaccination observation period, meaning say you will stay in the place where you got the shot for about 30 minutes, and your blood pressure will be checked. You'll be observed for any rash or any difficulty in breathing after the 30-minute period. It's unlikely that something will happen after that, and you can be on your way home. And immediately treat people with anaphylaxis signs and symptoms with a shot of epinephrine intramuscular. Okay, so we've all heard about the safety signal about what happened with a few folks who received the Astra vaccine in Europe. Fortunately, we have not heard of any similar report locally. The background is that there was a report of 30 cases of thromboembolism or blood clots forming among more than 5 million Astra vaccines in Europe. And this was the assessment of the WHO. Thromboembolic events or blood clotting occurs frequently for the general population. In extensive vaccination campaigns, it is routine for countries to signal adverse events after vaccination. Number 3, this does not mean that the event was linked to the shot, but it is a good practice to investigate this. And the WHO has already said in March 17 that they continue to assess the latest safety data, but at this time, the WHO considers the benefits of the Astra vaccine to outweigh the risks and recommends continuation of vaccination. So locally in our country, we have resumed the Astra vaccination. Okay, now after speaking about safety, now the second part of this is talking about vaccine efficacy. How useful are these vaccines? How effective are they? How efficacious are they? So this is how we calculate efficacy. For instance, on this far right, we have the number of folks who received the Pfizer vaccine. Here, 18,556. The placebo, which is just salt water, was given to 18,530. Out of these folks, 2 weeks after their second shot, they counted the number of people who developed COVID illness. As you can see in the numbers, only 8 Pfizer recipients got COVID after the 2 shots, Whereas for those who receive a placebo, 162 develop COVID. As you can see, these numbers are quite impressive. No? When you do the numbers, you find that the vaccine efficacy for Pfizer was 4.9% or about 5%. So that is the relative risk to acquire COVID after you receive your Pfizer vaccine. So what does this mean? This means that, for instance, if I and my friend Charilu here are in a small room and we speak to, say, a gentleman, let's say Mr. Fred Parungao, and we have a conference, we don't have our masks on, and we speak for half an hour, and the following day, Mr. Parungao gets a fever and he tests himself and he's found to be COVID positive, and he tells me that he's COVID positive. What is my risk and what is the risk of Charilu? Because we were all together. My risk will be only 5% compared to the risk of Charilu if Charilu has not received her shot. So Charilu's risk will be 100% to get the COVID illness because she was exposed to someone in close contact for more than 30 minutes. But my risk is only 5% of the risk of Charilu. So that's what relative risk means. Now, after getting that relative risk, what is vaccine efficacy, which is of interest to us? So efficacy is just 1 minus the relative risk, or 100% minus the 4.9%, or 95.1%. Okay, so what does this mean? So, say in our audience right now, if there are 100 attendees and all of us received our 2 vaccines, and we're more than 2 weeks after our second vaccine, and that vaccine was 95% efficacious, that would mean that if all 100 of us who were vaccinated get exposed to COVID definitely, from a definite exposure without our mask on, 95 out of 100 of us will be protected. Only 5 will come down with COVID, because that is what efficacy means. Okay, so having said that, let's go through the different vaccines that are available. And this is a summary slide comparing dosing intervals and storage requirements. So Pfizer and Moderna, these are again mRNA vaccines. Astra, J&J, and Sputnik are adenovirus vector vaccines, while Novavax is a protein subunit vaccine. These are the number of people who were involved in the trials. And importantly, it's also good for us to know where the trials were made. No? For Pfizer, it was studied in the US, Brazil, South Africa, Germany, Turkey. Moderna was only studied in the US. Astra was studied in the UK, Brazil, South Africa, and so forth. The Sputnik product was only studied in Russia. And these are the ages for the vaccine. All are for 18 and above, except for Pfizer, which is possibly given for 16 and above. And these are the intervals between vaccines. No? For Pfizer, Sputnik, and Novavax, it's 3 weeks. For Moderna, it's 4 weeks. For Astra, it's 3 months or 12 weeks. For J&J, it's a single dose. And these are the refrigeration requirements. No? So Astra, J&J, Sputnik, Novavax will be okay with normal refrigeration, while Pfizer and Moderna will need special freezers. Okay, next we talk here about efficacy of the vaccine after 1 dose alone. No? So you get 1 dose. I got my first dose about 6 weeks ago. What is my protection now? Do I have protection already after 1 shot? Okay, so these are the numbers. For Pfizer, they have a 52% vaccine efficacy in the first 21 days. No? So day 1 after the vaccine up to the 21st day, they have 52% vaccine efficacy already after 3 weeks. So you're half as likely to fall ill with COVID after you get exposed to someone with COVID 3 weeks after your shot. So may protection na tayo. For Moderna, it's 54% in the first 13 days. However, once you reach 2 weeks after the shot, your vaccine efficacy goes up to 92%. So these are excellent numbers. For Astra, 3 weeks after the vaccine, you already get 73% protection or vaccine efficacy. So 3 out of 4 times, if you get exposed to someone with COVID, 3 weeks after your Astra shot, you will not get sick with COVID. And if they waited, based on one study in a subsection or subsegment of their original study, if you wait up to 3 months, that protection goes up to 76% for the Astra vaccine. That's why we're receiving our Astra shots 3 months apart. Now for the J&J single-dose product, their vaccine efficacy is 66% 4 weeks after the vaccine. And it was different across their study continents. In the US, it was up to 72%. In Latin America, because of the Brazil variant, it was 66%. But in South Africa, because of the South African variant, their numbers were low, 57%. That's why they get the general number of 66%. What about the Russian product, Sputnik? The numbers are quite good. 2 weeks after their vaccine, their first shot, they have almost 88% vaccine efficacy for Sputnik. So these are good numbers. And for Sinovac, the ones that we are receiving here, unfortunately, they do not have good published data, but the data that have been passed on to us but has not been peer reviewed has shown that it has 51% vaccine efficacy 2 weeks after the shot, based on the Brazilian data for Sinovac. Okay, so I want you to take another look at this table for a few more seconds. So this is after 1 dose. Okay, now we go to the second dose. 3 weeks later, 4 weeks later, or 3 months later for Astra, you get your second dose, and what happens? So look at that. The numbers go up. For Pfizer, 7 days after your second dose, vaccine protection goes up to 95%. For Moderna, 14 days after the second dose goes up to 94%. For Astra, it goes up to 70%. However, in a subset of their population, if they waited 12 weeks for the interval between the 2 doses, the vaccine efficacy for Astra went up to 81%. And this is the reason why, again, we are being given the Astra 3 months apart. No? And this is the best we can get. No? 8 out of 10 times we will get good protection after our second Astra shot. For Sputnik, 7 days after the second shot, it's 91% efficacy. For Novavax, it was 89% for their UK study and 60% in their South African study, perhaps again because of the variants in South Africa. And for Sinovac, it's still about 51% 2 weeks after the second dose, based on their Brazil data, which is not peer reviewed. Okay, can I give you a few more seconds to look at these numbers? Okay, so these are the numbers we get from Sinopharm and Sinovac. These are 2 different companies that are Chinese. Sinopharm, which is also coming to our shores, I believe soon, has unpublished data of 79 to 86% efficacy. While for Sinovac, we have data, but these are not peer-reviewed and not published yet, from Turkey, Brazil, and Indonesia. It was as high as 91% for Turkey, as low as 50% for Brazil, and 65% for Indonesia. And again, all of these are unpublished. Okay, what about preventing asymptomatic COVID? Only Astra has data for preventing asymptomatic COVID. Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, Sputnik, and Sinovac did not study asymptomatic COVID. Astra has data that says that they can have 60% protection versus an asymptomatic COVID illness. Okay, and then here in this table, efficacy to prevent severe COVID. So, of course, we worry what will happen to me if 81% of the time the Astra vaccine will work? What if I become the 19% wherein the vaccine will not work? Or with the Sinovac vaccine, half the time it will work, but half the time it may not work. What will happen to me if I do get ill even after the Sinovac shot? And this is the answer. What is the efficacy of the vaccine to prevent severe COVID? Ito naman yung kinakatakutan natin, di ba? Can we just get COVID and have a mild flu-like illness? That's what we pray and hope for, if at all. No? If we get COVID at all, you don't want to get hospitalized and be at the point of even death or being on a mechanical ventilator. No? So that's what severe disease is. If you have a bad pneumonia and need a hospital bed. And this is the good news. No? The vaccines have good protection against severe COVID. No? So for Pfizer, efficacy versus severe disease, 89%. Even after 1 dose. For Moderna, 100% protection to prevent severe COVID 2 weeks after the second dose. For Astra, it was 100% 3 weeks after the first dose. For J&J, it's 85% protection against severe disease. For Sputnik, it's 100% 3 weeks after the first dose. And for Sinovac, which many of us received, 100% protection 2 weeks after the second dose. So these numbers, if these are very accurate, and we hope they continue to be accurate in the post-marketing surveillance, is a reassurance to us that we may not be getting vaccines as good as the Americans are getting Pfizer, Moderna, but if we can prevent severe disease to ourselves and our family, won't that be good enough, diba? That's better than nothing. No? If we don't get a vaccine, we have 0% protection versus COVID. No? And this second line gives protection versus hospitalization and death. And there's data for Moderna, J&J, and Sputnik, and also 100% to protect versus hospitalization and death. Okay, so only because Sinovac is one of the 2 vaccines available here, I am going to show you a slide here. This is a preprint, non-peer-reviewed Sinovac Brazilian phase 3 study findings from almost 10,000 Brazilians. So their study population were healthy Brazilian doctors and nurses. So this was a high-risk group, healthcare professionals, all of them. And they got 2 doses 2 weeks apart, vaccine versus placebo, from July to December 2020. And these were the results. Among the vaccinees or vaccine group, 85 developed COVID out of 4,900, while for the placebo group, about twice as much developed COVID. That's why they got that figure of about 51% primary efficacy versus symptomatic COVID. However, looking at the other numbers, number 5, subset with the 21-day interval between doses. So they stretched out the vaccine interval to 3 weeks, and the vaccine efficacy went up to 62% from 51%. So that's why we're also giving the Sinovac vaccines here 3 to 4 weeks apart. And they also had data for efficacy to prevent mild COVID. It was 84%, but efficacy to prevent moderate to severe COVID was 100%. So this is a good data. And vaccine efficacy for 60 and older, 51%, but there was a limited number of people in the elderly group, 419. And this is the reason why for a while the Philippine government was not allowing Sinovac to be given to the seniors, because in the Brazil study, they only had less than 500 elderly who received the vaccine. But these numbers are big enough. Okay, so what about real life effectiveness of the COVID vaccination? So we have data here from Israel. As you know, Israel is the one country that has vaccinated the most number of people in their population, more than the Americans and the English. And so we have data from the Israelis. In this study that I quote, they compared COVID vaccinated versus unvaccinated Israelis. And 14 to 21 days after the first dose of Pfizer alone, they already found 46% vaccine efficacy. While 7 or more days after the second Pfizer dose, they already found 92% vaccine efficacy for the millions of Israelis that received the vaccine. So in real life, in the real number terms, the Israelis have shown us that the efficacy in the population at large is as good as what were found in the vaccine trials. So again, this is evidence that the vaccines work, similar to the numbers that they provided to us in their trials. Furthermore, in this study, that there were 2 studies from Israel that showed that among Israelis who were vaccinated but who developed COVID nevertheless, their virus load was reduced, so that this may indicate lower infectiousness or contagiousness after they got the vaccine, which may impact on disease transmission. Nagkasakit man yung 8% nito, itong 8% na the vaccine didn't work properly, they were still much less contagious, and their vaccine prevented them from transmitting the virus to other people in their homes. Okay, other aspects of vaccination. You just notice, do not give another vaccine within 2 weeks of getting the COVID vaccine. No? So for instance, if you get the flu shot now, ideally you'd wait 2 weeks before getting your COVID shot. No? Or if you got the COVID shot last week, you should wait 2 weeks before you get the flu shot. And Mr. Trump got surprisingly well when he got his COVID illness. That's because he received monoclonal antibody, here number 2. If you get monoclonal antibody or convalescent plasma, this is another treatment that we provide COVID patients. You cannot get the shot within 3 months. No? You can only get COVID vaccine 90 days or 3 months after you receive your convalescent plasma if you're hospitalized. And after your COVID illness, this is also a frequent question that I'm asked. One can get your COVID vaccine after you recover, which is usually 2 weeks, and finishing your obligatory quarantine period. No? So if you're quarantined for 2 weeks, after that, you can get your shot. If you're quarantined for 3 weeks, after 3 weeks, you can get your shot. Vaccination of pregnant people. If a pregnant person, a nurse, is part of a group recommended to be vaccinated, or a doctor, they may choose to be vaccinated. What about lactating or breastfeeding? A lactating nurse or doctor may choose to be vaccinated even after she got her shot. What about vaccinating people with underlying medical conditions? No, people on dialysis, people with chronic lung disease, bronchitis, emphysema, people with hypertension, people with diabetes. All of these folks can get the vaccine. No? So mRNA COVID vaccines may be administered to people with underlying medical conditions who have no contraindication to vaccination. What this means is you're not allergic to the component in the vaccine, which is polyethylene glycol. And okay, vaccinating immunocompromised folks, immunocompromised people, like people on chemotherapy, people who have HIV perhaps, people on steroid, for the most part, can get the vaccine as long as you get an okay from your oncologist. What about vaccinating people with autoimmune conditions, people with Guillain-Barré syndrome? With few exceptions, these folks with autoimmune conditions can also get the vaccine. About people with Bell's palsy, like this, when you have half of your face paralyzed, you can get the vaccine also. Okay, what about does previous COVID-19 infection give long-lasting immunity? Or asked another way, do you need a vaccine after you recover from COVID? And the answer is yes. In this study I quote here, this analyzed Danish infection rates, people from Denmark, between March to May to 2020, and again from September to December 2020. So between March to May, there were 11,727 Danes who developed COVID, out of more than 500,000. And between September to December, 72 out of these 11,000 developed COVID a second time. So when they did the math, they found that the protection against repeat infection was only about 81%. So even if you get COVID, you have a chance to get COVID a second time, 6 months to 12 months later. So previous infection will give you only a protection about 81%. And for those 65 and older, the protection even went down to as little as 47%. So for that reason, again, after you recover, 2 to 3 weeks after you are deemed to have had COVID and you're off quarantine, you can get your shot already. Okay, so this is my last few slides. Convincing people to get vaccinated. What counts to people around us and ourselves? So there's much inter-individual heterogeneity. To convince people to be vaccinated, it's critical to proactively inform all of us to expect side effects, and that's what I sought to do now, and to emphasize vaccine effectiveness, that these vaccines work. Number 3, a higher local vaccine coverage can create an altruistic or a selfless concern for the well-being of others. Purpose to get a vaccine. No? If we all in our village decide to get a vaccine, and that's better than 100% is better than 70%, no? Because it gives that altruistic feeling that when you walk around in your village in the morning, you don't have to worry that 3 out of the 10 were not vaccinated. Number 4, charging for the vaccine, of course, versus being free may lower the probability of getting it, and the government knows this well enough. So health officials should address the diversity of expectations about the vaccine by providing people-oriented immunization services. For example, in that Chinese report I cited earlier, folks who were older, who had a lower education level and lower incomes had a higher probability to want the vaccine, whereas those who were younger, higher educated, and high income people may underestimate the safety of the vaccine. They'll say, okay, I'm 30 years old, I'm as fit as a horse, I go to the gym, I'm not going to die from this illness, so I'm prepared to take it on. So that should not be the case. No? Number 3, therefore, proactive communication on vaccine side effects and effectiveness is critical to stimulate vaccine uptake, especially for younger, higher educated, and higher income citizens. And this is one strategy that the Israelis found. They found that younger people in Israel were more vaccine hesitant. And what the Israelis did was they opened vaccination centers at night. Maybe the Rotary Club of Makati can consider this. My good friend, Dito Oscar de Venecia, one of your senior members, I know was in charge of the Rotarians' vaccination efforts in 20 years ago. This is a big challenge for the Rotary. If you could redirect your attention from polio to COVID, so many people will be very thankful. So this is one strategy that the Israelis did, open the vaccination centers at night, especially for our Filipinos who work in call centers. Maybe they're in their call center at strange hours or unusual hours. Let's make it easy for them, di ba? Or number two, removing the need for pre-registration, which is a hassle. No. Number three, setting up vaccine carts in nature reserves on weekends where these younger folks would go to. So where else do the younger folks go, di ba? Maybe we should provide our vaccination efforts in those places, and offering incentives such as free meals. Now, in Makati Med, when we were vaccinating for the past 2 months, the doctors and the nurses were given free donuts as part of this vaccination effort. So furthermore, more than 30% of those who do not want to get vaccinated in that Chinese study worried about side effects. So we need to inform people what are the side effects. Diba, I told you 80% will have arm pain, fatigue will happen in 60%, headache in 50%, muscle pain in 30%. So yun ang asahan mo para makalma yung mga tao, di ba? But these are mild and will last only for a couple of days, and they will last briefly. And the study found that the trust in the vaccine and the perceived risk of COVID-19 increased vaccine uptake. So we need to build on this vaccine trust and stress the dangers of COVID. Ano ba yung dangers of illness? Alam natin lahat yun. But I see it every day. I've had, it's very sad, because what I do, I'm an infectious disease doctor. I see people on the ventilators in the ER. There are 4 people on the ventilator in the ER because they can't get into a room because the hospital is full. It's a miserable illness, really. It's very sad and very despairing. People are anxious. People are fearful. People grief and despair when you are a family with someone with COVID. And it's not something that you would wish on your worst enemy. No? Well, so what are the dangers? Just to repeat, risk of acute and long-term health, loss of income and employment, death in 2%, but higher the older you are, spreading this to family members, including the elderly, to angkong, lola, lolo, huge financial cost, even for a moderate to critical illness. So my last slide, Dr. Flavier was our idol, was a very effective speaker and administrator from 2 decades ago. He made it possible to vaccinate the whole country for measles with like a 98% vaccination rate. No, it can be done. We have the infrastructure to do it. The problem now is we just don't have the supply of the vaccine. No? So policymakers should engage in widespread media communications to maximize local vaccine coverage. So fellow Rotarians from Makati, let's target 100% coverage. Our campaign should stress Barangay Rotary Makati. Sama-sama tayong lahat magpabakuna para sa kabutihan ng ating lahat. That's all I have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia, for that very, very enlightening speech. We will now go to the open forum where our Rotarians and guests will ask questions of Dr. Garcia. But before we do that, let me read again our house rules regarding that. It says, for our open forum, after the talk of the speaker, in case you want to ask a question, please use the raise hand button or simply notify us by typing in the comment box. Alternately, you may want to type your own question and we will try to accommodate it during the Q&A session. So, Dr. Garcia,
Yes,
if I may start with the first question, then we'll open it for the others as well. My question, Dr. Garcia, is there have been a lot of discussions in social media about the effectiveness of ivermectin as opposed to having a COVID shot. Will we have your views on this question?
Okay, so I have been an infectious disease doctor since 1992, and I have not once I have not once used ivermectin for any infection whatsoever. It's used for certain intestinal parasites. So frankly, I found it a bit strange that anti-parasitic drug would be used for a viral illness like COVID. No? But let me go back to last year. No? Last year when COVID was starting, and we were all excited when we found that hydroxychloroquine, which is an anti-malarial drug, supposedly works against COVID. And Mr. Trump was even using hydroxychloroquine for a long time. And a lot of us were using hydroxychloroquine because we didn't have much other medications available really for COVID. And so a proper study was done, and Makati Medical Center was a participant in the so-called Solidarity Trial, wherein people from all over the world, Europe, America, Philippines, Asia, participated. And after many tens of thousands were studied who developed COVID, who were given hydroxychloroquine or not, it was found that yung hydroxychloroquine nakasama pa, no? The mortality increased among those who received it. No? But because of that because of the way this study was done, it was done prospectively in a planned way. Nakita namin with the best data that hydroxychloroquine does not work. No? So yun ang gusto natin makita sa ivermectin. It should be, there are no prospective studies done for ivermectin. No? So hopefully if this is done properly and we have evidence that it works, wow, we'd be surprised, but we'd be the first people to use it. Pero sa aking karanasan, for people like myself who treat COVID patients in the hospital, none of my colleagues use the product, really. So it's a product of hope, essentially. People in the audience right now, di ba, may COVID ka, anong mainom mo? Wala eh. There's no antiviral that's available by mouth that will help you. So unfortunately, people clutch for straws. So maybe that's why people would like to use ivermectin in the absence of any other product that's available. No? But may safety issues yan. No? I've never used the drug, but syempre, any medicine we take by mouth, we have to be aware that baka makasama naman ito sa atin. No? I do have horror stories of people who did take it and did not make it, did not come out alive. But again, that's not, that's biased. When I say that, I'm being biased because this was not based on a planned study. Diba?
Thank you, Doctor. Here is a question from one of our Rotarians. Given the possible constricted supply of vaccines, the situation of being forced to accept mixed vaccines or vaccine brands with different platforms is not remote. Would it be safe to use a second dose, a vaccine brand different from the first dose that was administered on you?
Okay, so the answer to that, the CDC also spoken on that, and alam niyo, the US CDC. So ideally, when you get your shot, you will receive a piece of paper, you got your shot in your right arm, volume, the name of the vaccine, and hopefully you put that on file so that 3 months later, you go back to the center and get your shot, and show them that you got Astra or Sinovac. Ideally, ganon. There are no studies kasi that have studied that if you got Pfizer first time and Moderna second, how good does that work? And in fact, these are different vaccine technologies. I did explain to you that Astra is an adenovirus vector vaccine, whereas the Sinovac is killed whole cell virus. So it's different products, different technologies. So until study addresses that specifically, we will not encourage people to do that. So dapat tapusin niyo yung dalawang series for the same
Same brand.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Doctor. Another question, if I may. I'm reading from the Q&A questions that were how do we address the seemingly uncontrolled current surge in the Philippines? What are the actionable steps that we can take?
Okay, hard question to answer. Alam niyo, let's go back again to last year, when you remember in end of January or was it early February when we first heard the report of the first 3 visitors from China who developed COVID. So tatlong tourists, and one of them died, two went home. And for 2 months, tahimik ng Pilipinas, no? We were all so happy. We were saying, baka sa Pilipinas dahil mainit, hindi nagtatribe yung virus, And then March comes and we get hit in the stomach. And then everyone is scrambling. The hospital system was not prepared. And so that was from early January to March. Sa March lang nakabuelo yung kaso. Sa aking pananaw, my personal opinion, what's happening to us, because this surge happened in the second week of March, and now it's still going on. Ang aking pananaw, naipon ito from the New Year and Christmas revelry. It's like if you look at the pond and you see the school of fish, if there are only 2 or 3 fish there swimming, you won't see it. But if the school of fish have multiplied 8-fold, now you see that big school of small fish underneath the water. So that's what we're seeing right now. Probably the COVID cases that were built up over the New Year, built up over 6 to 8 doubling time. March pa lang natin nakita na ganun na pala karami. Hindi natin naman ako. So really, what has to be done is, remember last year in August, the healthcare workers said time out muna, At nakinig naman ng gobyerno. So in August, we did time out, and the cases only went down in the end of October. So essentially, it took 2.5 months for cases to go down. And now we're hardly seeing it, At least hindi na tayo nasa 15,000, bumaba na tayo 7,000, pero unti-unti bababa yan, So I hate to see it going this way, that business is curtailed, our freedoms are curtailed, but that's really the only way that we will stop this. And I know there are people in the audience who have had family members who could not get a room in the hospitals they wanted to go to because of our problem. Our healthcare system is overwhelmed with what we have. Can you imagine? We were struggling at 10 to 15,000 cases per day, and then we read about India, 340,000 cases per day. But look at India; they relaxed their rules on social engagement when their numbers were down to 10,000. That's what our numbers are, 10,000. If we do not do what we're doing right now, our numbers will go way above, hopefully not naman to the numbers of India. But right now, with what we're dealing with, wala tayong kapasidad sa ospital. Kulang ang ospital natin. You hear of people flying to Cebu, going to Pampanga just to get healthcare because they cannot get a room in Medical City, Makati Med. So I do not have the answers. It's a very difficult situation, Mr. Parungo.
Thank you, Dr. Here's another question. What were the reasons Sinovac was originally not for seniors, and what were the reasons that the Philippines now approves it to be given to seniors? What brought the change?
Okay, so I showed that slide, Mr. Parungao. I showed a slide there where in Brazil, only less than 500 folks came from the senior age group. So they had too little data. They would have wanted to see sana a few thousand. But the numbers, they found that in those 480 or so seniors who did get a shot, they did get vaccine protection by about umabot sila mga 47%. So when our own FDA looked at those numbers, they said, well, the 47% is close to the 50% that is the number for their general Sinovac group. So pumayag na rin sila.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
Another question. How much time do you need before you take the next dose after you've taken the first and secondary dose?
Okay, well, for Sinovac, the difference between the 2 doses will be 4 weeks or as little as 3 weeks. For Astra, it's 3 months. It's a 3-month. Depende sa produkto yan, Mr. Parunga. For Pfizer, it's a 3-week difference.
But Doctor, after having taken the first and second dose,
Yeah.
do you need another shot, say 6 months afterwards or 1 year afterwards?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So that remains to be found, you know, and as we speak, people are studying this. The Americans who got their first shots in December, Pfizer is studying what proportion of those folks still have antibodies now. So that's 4 months later or 5 months later. So this is an ongoing process, and we will know soon enough when there's more data. So right now we don't have the answer to that because evidently the shots that were given in December are still working up to now. So every month madadagdagan yung kaalaman natin over time, Mr. Pangao.
Thank you. Doctor, when you were presenting your slides, it seems that it is only the Sinovac vaccine that uses actual virus. Why do you think that it's only the Sinovac vaccine that uses that, whereas the others do not use actual virus?
But alam niyo kasi itong mga different vaccine companies, they use, one company might have a product that uses this platform, another platform. So one company like Merck, for instance, might have 3 different products in 3 different platforms kasi naguunahan yan eh. You're competing with the rest of the world. There are more than 200 vaccine candidates all over the world, and obviously there's a big payoff for the successful ones. So it's a race against time, They're trying different products and see which one will work, So it just happens that their company that was probably used to that, their researchers, their technicians were used to the wholesale vaccine, Mr. Parangao, kaya they decided to go with that. On the other hand, the people from Pfizer and Moderna said or found that we're going to be able to come up with, be able to make this mRNA vaccine easier in large volumes to supply hundreds of millions in a short amount of time. And that's probably why they cast their lot on the RNA vaccines, and they were quite successful. No, they practically vaccinated the whole of Israel, and now more than a majority of America has been vaccinated by Pfizer and Moderna.
Thank you, Doctor. Another question, Doctor. There is a message circulating on social media that after the first COVID shot, the body immunity goes down and therefore makes the person more susceptible to COVID infection. It also says that after the second shot, the immunity goes down further for 2 more weeks, and that it is only after the second week succeeding the second shot that the body immunity will increase. This seems to be a little different from what we have heard in your lecture. Can you please comment on that
Yeah.
social media?
Hindi well, para sa amin hindi totoo yan, no? People who are professionals, healthcare workers, who understand our immune system. Ganito yung kasi, once you get, even this, let's talk about the flu shot, no, or a measles shot. It would take 2 weeks for your antibodies to build up to a good level to be able to protect you from the flu after you get your flu shot. So there's a 2-week wait. Hindi yung aakyat kagad yung antibody mo in the first 10 to 13 days, siguro yung kwento that you narrate has to do with people who develop COVID within a week of the shot. Alam niyo nangyari, and 4 of my colleagues developed COVID within a week of their vaccine. What happens is, you go to the injection center and there's a mass of people there. Unfortunately, you might get COVID during that line-up period, during the filling up of the paperwork for pre-registration. And true enough, 6 days later, you did get your shot, but your shot has not been there long enough in your body to have provided you with antibodies kasi 2 weeks pa ho yun eh. No? Mangyari, nahawa ka during that pila, you went outside of your house, you went to the testing center, kaya kailangan tayo lahat mag-ingat pag magpapabakuna tayo. And that's how they got it. Not because their immune system was down, but because they got exposed unusually and unfortunately during that mass of people, when people were massed and lined up together. Yun, kailangan ho nating tandaan yun.
Thank you, Doctor. There are still a number of questions. If I may continue to ask them, I hope you don't mind. One of them is this: please comment on animal trials being skipped and that no study on long-term effects of the vaccine have been done. Can you please comment on that?
Okay, well, I honestly, I'm not aware of the amount of work done for animal trials. No, pero yung long-term effect, alam nyo, you know, we wish that we could have the luxury of, doing our phase 3 trials like we are doing now, and then observing these folks for the next 3 to 5 years for long-term effects. But unfortunately, we do not have that luxury. No, our neighbor has died, our brother-in-law has died, our cousin-in-law has died, diba? And there's so much grief that this illness has brought us. So it's a unique time in our history. We do not have the luxury to wait because this illness is very highly contagious. This has not happened with the flu, no? Because with the flu and measles, our human population has already been immunized, to measles. Measles is a nastier virus than COVID. No? If measles was not, if the people of the world was not immune to measles, maybe one third of the people in our Earth's population would die from measles. No? But because measles has been around for 1100 years and there's a vaccine, tayo lahat sa audience nito, immune na tayo sa measles. Mangyari, the vaccine we're up against, COVID, there is no human immunity to it. No? It's a new virus that was unleashed upon us, unfortunately. No? So we do not have the luxury of waiting because we know that 2 out of every 100 will die from it. No? So that's too big of a risk for us to wait a few years for long-term side effects. Pero alam niyo, yung mga apo natin, mga anak natin, di ba? We used to bring our kids and now your grandchildren to the pediatrician. And the vaccines that we've been giving your kids have been around since the 60s and 70s. Wala naman kaming nakikitang mga long-term effect ng mga vaccine na yan. No? If you think about it, no? Yung mga DPT, MMR, hepatitis B. Miskin na kayo, nagpapa-vaccine kayo for Hepa A, Hepa B. Wala naman tayong narinig na mga long-term side effects ng mga ganyan, di ba? Mr. Panrongan.
Thank you, Doctor. Just a few more before we end this. Perhaps one or two. We have heard in your talk that remdesivir may not be the best medicine that should be given, but nevertheless, there are still doctors who prescribe that. And apart from remdesivir, other medicines like tocilizumab and another one. But the problem is when they are prescribed, they don't seem to be available immediately. And people who have been given that subscription will go to a lot of problems making sure that they get the supply. So what do you think should be done so that at least a few amount of supplies of these medicines become available readily?
Okay, yeah, well, previously we spoke about ivermectin, so we said, personally, we do not use ivermectin. For remdesivir, we do use remdesivir. No, we have medications that practitioners use, dexamethasone, remdesivir, tocilizumab. There's a new drug that we've been using, baricitinib.
Yeah.
And we use convalescent plasma. That's another commodity that's hard to find. We also do hemoperfusion, wherein we get the blood of someone who's very sick, pass it through like a dialysis machine called the hemoperfusion machine, and try to get the poisons out of that person's blood. So those are the 6 or so common medications or treatments that we provide for very sick hospitalized patients. I think the government is trying to help out. I saw in the past week that the government is trying to not allow the overpricing of remdesivir. So unfortunately, it's a market, and the demand for these products is high. And I also have a list in my phone numbers for sources for remdesivir when other doctors or patients are asking for it. So we have that list in our phones so we can pass around these data. Pero unfortunately, that's a problem, Mr. Parungao, when the supply cannot match the demand. The demand is just too high that the market cannot provide the necessary medications. Mr. Parungao.
Thank you. Doctor, looks like we will have to end this question and answer session because of time constraints. And we would like to thank you very much for the very, very very good answers that you've given, which increased to some extent our understanding of the vaccines against COVID. I would now like to call on our presidents for their response. I'd like to call first on PVP President Ricky Trinidad for his response. President Ricky.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm really so happy and delighted because to Dr. Garcia, I think this is the most substantial presentation I've seen on vaccines. And the data and information is really so relevant and so practical. Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia. No, I took a lot of shots of all your tables, and I think I hope you don't mind. I would like to share them with some of my friends because I think it's going to be so very helpful. Thank you again, sir.
Okay, please do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Ricky. I would now like to call on PVP President Peter Manzano of the Rotary Club of Makati for his response.
Thank you, PP Fred. To V or not to V, be vaccinated or not to be vaccinated, that is. Although it feels exactly what the opening phrase, to be or not to be, in Act Scene or Act 3, Scene 1 of Shakespeare's play Hamlet seeks to convey. In the speech, Prince Hamlet contemplates death and suicide, bemoaning the pain and unfairness of life, yet acknowledging that the alternative, which is death, might be worse. We all know the survey conducted last 2 months ago, where about 94% of Filipinos worry about catching the COVID-19. However, about 61% do not want to be vaccinated, whether it's Sinovac, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Sputnik, Pfizer, or Johnson & Johnson. Only 16% said they are willing to get vaccinated, while 23% are undecided. And the primary reason given by the 84% of the respondents who said they don't want the vaccine is the uncertainty in the vaccine's safety. The other reasons given for the hesitation include doubts on the vaccine's effectiveness, that they don't need it, that it might not be free, or that it might be too expensive. The 16% who said they are willing to get vaccinated mostly preferred the US brand Pfizer at 52%, followed by 22% in favor of Sinovac vaccine. Clearly, it is not the brand of the vaccine that is the main concern. It is the willingness of the people to get inoculated, not just over safety concerns, but likewise on effectiveness. Until the people's concern over the vaccine safety is addressed, people will not line up to have themselves inoculated. And if that happens, then we will never achieve herd immunity and the virus will remain living among us until everybody is infected. It's a good thing we are getting better information from our medical experts on the effectiveness of the vaccines. Our speaker has shared to us the vaccine side effects bottom line, which I would like to read again. Number 1, shot site pain is in about 80%, fatigue and headache in about 60%, fever in 9 to 20%. Older people had less side effects versus the younger ones, a bit more side effects during the second dose. Side effects lasted 1 to 2 days with mild to moderate in intensity. Vaccine caused no deaths, no serious adverse effects in less than 130,000 people in vaccine trials. And the most important thing, the approved vaccines are safe. As Rotarians, we should follow the lead of Rotary International's response to the pandemic, which include not only the vaccination and prevention efforts around the world, but supporting fair and equal access to vaccines and curbing the spread of the virus by donating protective gear and other supplies to clinics and hospitals that are under strain, but extends to the global effort of helping health authorities communicate the life-saving information about COVID-19 and vaccination and combating misinformation. So part of our mandate then as Rotarians during these times is to help in talking to people on why we all need to get inoculated. I know this may be an emotionally charged topic for some, but finding our shared values may be a good way to start the conversation. The message is clear. Just like how Prince Hamlet felt while he was reflecting on his pain and the unfairness of life, the alternative is obviously worse. It is not a question of whether or not we should get inoculated. It is a question of when. For those who have access to the vaccines, they should already get them as advocated by our speaker. And for the rest of us who are still waiting for our turn, let's all maintain our minimum health protocols and keep ourselves safe and well. As our RCM shooters say, better to have one to protect ourselves and our loved ones and not need it than need one and don't have it. I believe that sums up the vaccine efficacy data shared to us by our speaker earlier. And to echo what he said in his last slide, fellow Rotarians, let's target 100% coverage.
Yeah.
On behalf of the Rotary Club of Makati, our lovely aunts, our district governor Chacha Camacho, the other Rotarians from the different Rotary clubs in our district, especially to my classmates, the Perfect Vision presidents, our Rotaractors, and all the other guests in attendance, please accept our heartfelt gratitude for taking time and sharing with us your valuable insights on why we should all get a COVID shot. And as tokens of our appreciation for your time and service, we shall be giving you a copy of our 50th anniversary coffee table book, which contains our club's 50 years of community service and fellowship, together with a bottle of red wine for you to enjoy while going through the pages of our book. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Robert Dennis Garcia.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Chairman Sano. Thank you.
President Peter. Now, before we adjourn, I would like to ask you to please turn on your cameras for a group picture taking with our presidents and our guest speaker. Everybody, please turn on your camera, and may we request the RCM Secretariat to take our group.
Okay, 1, 2. Second window.
Are we done?
Last window. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I would now like to call again our two presidents to adjourn this meeting. May I please first call on President Ricky.
On behalf of the Rotary Club of Makati Premier District, I adjourn this meeting.
To call on President Peter.
On behalf of the Rotary Club of Makati, I hereby adjourn this joint meeting.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Classmate Ricky.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Peter. Salamat. Thank you. Thank you.
Sharido, thank you.
Thank you.